Good afternoon. My name is Rourke Miller, and I'm the director of the International Faculty and Scholars Office. And welcome to our training on completing the Form 8843. This is for those of you who have this tax filing obligation. So this is a relatively short presentation today, but even so, please do hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and then you can submit them in the chat and I'll respond to them there. So who must file Form 8843? Basically, anyone who is in F or J status and who was present in the United States at any point in time during the 2022 tax year, which runs from January 1st to December 31st of 2022. And if you are non-resident aliens for federal tax purposes. So you have to be in F or J status and in the US at one point in 2022 and be a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes. So something's going on with my video, so I'm going to stop. Well, I may stop my video if this continues. Okay, so here's the flow chart for understanding what your tax filing obligations are. So basically, you start over here and you determine if you're a resident or non-resident. And we'll get into that in the next couple of slides. But basically, you determine resident or non-resident. If you are a resident, then you would file like any US citizen would. And of course, resident is based on the tax definition rather than the immigration definition, okay? So it doesn't pertain directly to how our immigration regulations might define you as a resident. So if you are a non-resident, then you have to determine whether you had any US source income. So if your US source income, if you had some between January 1st and December 31st, then you would need to file the 1040 NR and the Form 8843. But if you had no US source income, then you only need to file the Form 8843. Okay, so if you know that you're a resident alien, then you don't need to be on this call. And if you received payments from a US source, for instance, UC San Diego, then also this presentation is not necessary for you because you're going to have to file the 1040 NR as well as the 8843. I mean, certainly you can stay and listen to how to complete the 8843, but there's the 1040 is also going to be required, the 1040 NR. Okay, so we're going to start by understanding what we mean when we say resident alien versus non-resident alien. And I like to always say for federal tax purposes, because that makes it obvious that we're talking about the tax definition of residency rather than the immigration definition of residency. So determining your tax residency is based on two things. The first thing I don't have here, it's called the green card test, but it's pretty obvious. If you have a green card, then you're a resident alien for tax purposes. If you don't have a green card, then you default to something called the substantial presence test. And this is where our federal government asks you to identify how many days you've been in the country in your F or J status. Well, actually any status at this point. And they want to determine if you've been in the US for at least 31 days of the current tax year, and the current tax year is 2022. Even though we're in the 2023 calendar year, we're talking about our tax filing obligations for income earned between January 1st and December 31st of 2022. Therefore, the current tax year is 2022. So the substantial presence test basically asks to see if you've been in the US in 2022 for at least 31 days, and also that in the past 3 years, do you have at least 183 days of presence, for which they look at the total number of days in 2022 and count them wholly. And then they look at the previous year, 2021, and only count a third of those days. And then going on, they look at the yet again previous year of 2020 and only count 1/6 of the days. So that's the rather strange formula that our federal government uses for persons to determine if they are resident aliens or non-resident aliens through the substantial presence test. However, for persons in F or J status, there's something called exempt individuals. So you may be exempt individuals. And the exempt individual status doesn't mean you're exempt from paying taxes or from filing a tax return. It means you're exempt from counting days of presence for purposes of the substantial presence test. So this test that we just went over, that's on the top part of this slide, if you are an exempt individual in J or F status, then you don't necessarily count all your days of presence. So let's look a little more carefully at what an exempt individual is. F and J students, you can have up to 5 years of presence in the United States in those statuses. And you can exclude counting days of presence during those 5 years. So J scholars are a bit different. You can exclude counting days of presence for up to 2 years of presence over the prior 6 years. So it's a very different approach. F and J students, it's a 5 years total lifetime maximum. So if you were a student many years ago and spent 5 years back then in F or J status, and now you're back again, those 5 years count. For J scholars, it's just a 6-year look back period. Once you finish 6 years, everything drops off prior to those 6 years. So it's kind of complicated. We'll look a little more closely at it. A couple other things about it. So F1 students, of course, pretty straight, just you count 5 years. J1s, you have to determine your student or scholar status based on the category of J1 that you're in. So you look at box 4 on your DS 2019. Here's a picture with the red box here, and that indicates your category. So if there's a category such as student master's, student doctorate, student intern, student undergraduate, those are student categories, and the 5-year exclusion applies to you all. If you are in a research scholar, short-term scholar, or professor category, then you're in the scholar category and you have a 2-year exclusion period within a 6-year overall look-back period. So that's how you determine whether you are in the scholar category or the student category if you're J1. So some things to know about when looking at your tax residency status. A single day of presence in a calendar year counts as a full year. So say you arrived in the United States on December 20th of 2021. Well, then that means you were here in 2021. That's a full year of presence. So it doesn't matter how short a time period. If you're there at least 1 day for that calendar year, then that's one of the calendar years that applies to you for purposes of being an exempt individual. And of course, if you were here earlier in student or scholar status, that can also impact the result of your substantial presence test. So most of you are probably in very straightforward situations. I'm going to look at both F1 student and a J1 scholar and describe these straightforward situations. So basically, if you're an F1 or J1 in a student category, and you first arrived in the US no earlier than January 1st, 2018, and you had no prior presence in the US in F or J status, and you've not changed status, then you will be a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes for 2022. So basically, you can count on your hand the years. So if you arrived, say, September 1st of 2018, well, 2018 is 1 year, then 2019 is a second year, and 2020 is a third year, and 2021 is a fourth year, and 2022 is a fifth year. So that's 5 years, and you can exclude days of presence for purposes of the substantial presence test for all those years. If, however, you had arrived at some point in 2017, then your 5-year period ends on in 2021, and you would have to start counting days of presence in 2022. Now let's look at a scholar situation. So if you're a J1 scholar and you first arrived in the US no earlier than January 1st, 2021, and you had no prior presence in the US in F or J status and have not changed status, then you will be a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes for 2022. Again, by counting on your fingers, you were here at some point, say March 1st, 2021, you arrived. So that's 1 year, 2021, and 2022 is the second year. And you can exclude all days of presence for 2022. That does mean, however, for this year, 2023, you will become a resident alien if you meet the substantial presence test in terms of counting days in 2023. But that's for next year. I just wanted to throw that out there as an example. I hope that did not complicate things. And again, if you have a prior history, then your situation is probably much more complicated. And you can look at the hyperlink here is to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, which oversees all the tax and revenue for the federal government. And they have information on how to take the substantial presence test, and you can do that directly with their information through that website. Okay, so that was just giving you your background. So hopefully you were able to understand from your individual circumstance whether you are a resident alien or a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes. If you're a resident alien, then the rest of this workshop does not apply to you. If you're a non-resident alien and you have no US source income, then stick around and we'll look at how to complete the Form 8843. And again, you can download it from this hyperlink up here to the IRS website. And this is what it looks like. It's a 2-page form. And then there are instructions as well, which I didn't include on this screenshot, but they follow on pages 3 and 4 of this form that you can download at this hyperlink. So basically, a quick overview. There's this heading section, which all of you will need to complete. And then there's part 1, which everyone completes, general information. And then there's part 2, which is specifically for teachers and trainees, which refers to basically our scholars. Part 3 is specifically for students. Our F1 students and our J1s in a student category would complete part 3. So F1 students and J students do not complete part 2, and J1 scholars do not complete part 3. And then you skip part 4 and 5 because those don't apply to your situations. And then you see the signature block here. And this is where you would sign if you were filing just this form and no additional form. You have to sign on this. Okay. So we are going to now go step by step in completing this form. So the tax year here, you're going to leave blank because everyone can easily use the standard January 1st to December 31st. So just leave that blank. You're not trying to change your tax reporting period. And then, of course, you insert your name. And then you insert your U.S. taxpayer identification. So that would be either your Social Security number or your individual taxpayer identification number. Now, it could be that virtually none of you have these, and that is fine. If you don't have an SSN or an I-10, then just write none in that blank. You don't have to have this. And then you insert your address in your home country. So for the address and country of residence, you input it in your home country, or the country that you were living in prior to arriving in the US. And of course, if you're no longer living in the US, or soon to be no longer living in the US, just insert your current address there, wherever it is. And then, of course, if you are still in the US, then you insert your address in the US and leave it blank if you no longer live in the US. So if the IRS were ever to try to contact you, they would use your US address if one is input in this blank. And if not, then they would contact you in your home country, wherever that is. And I doubt that they would ever follow up to contact you. Okay, so that was the heading. Now we're going to look at the part 1, general information. So this, again, everyone fills out this section, and you start with the type of your US visa. And by visa, they really mean what non-immigrant status were you admitted into the US with. So you would just input J1 or F1, depending on what you were admitted in, and then the date that you entered the US. So I just threw in those dates. Then next, they're going to ask you what your current non-immigrant status is. So here they're going to check and see if you've changed status or not. So I'm assuming most of you probably have not changed status. So you just put the same status in. If you did change, for instance, if a J1 changed to F1 or vice versa, then you would want to put in what your current one is and then enter the date of the change and the previous status that you held. For the next questions 2 and 3, they're going to ask for your citizenship countries during the tax year. So this is, you're a non-resident alien. So what was your citizenship country for this tax year of 2022, if you're not resident alien here? And then they're going to also ask you what country issued you your passport that you traveled to the US on. And again, for those of you who may have multiple passports, you would use the passport that, that you used to enter the United States with. And then, of course, enter your passport number. Those are all straightforward questions. Now we get to the more interesting one where you actually have to count the number of days in 2022 you claim you can exclude for, or enter the actual number of days you were present in the US during each of these years. So you actually have to count these, literally. So think back to when you first entered the country. So I'm going to basically say in 2020, I was not here. As you can see from question 1, I didn't enter until 2021. So I have 0 days of presence in 2020. In 2021, I arrived on September 1st. I didn't leave the country once I arrived. So there were 122 days that I was in the United States in J1 status for 2021. And then in 2022, I was here for the full year, except that I took a little leave during the summertime to go visit family in my home country. So I was gone for actually 35 days. So I was only here in the country or 330 days in 2022. Okay. So these 3 years correspond to that substantial presence test where you take the full number of days in 2022, 1/3 of the days in 2021, and 1/6 of the days in 2020, right? But remember, you all are most likely exempt individuals as either J1 scholars or F1 or J1 students. And so for that reason, you need to enter the number of days in 2022 you claim you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. So if you're a scholar and you only arrived in 2021, then you're excluding all days of presence from 2021 and 2022. So I'm going to look at this particular question, enter the number of days in 2022 you claim you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. And it's going to be 330. So all the days of 2022. So basically, if you're a student or scholar and you're still an exempt individual, you would just indicate all the days that you were present in 2022 as days that you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. Okay, so that was the general information for everyone. Now we're going to look at part 2 for scholars. So for here, they want you to enter the name, address, and telephone number of the academic institution where you taught, did research, whatever your scholarly activity was. You just put that in there. And I have the address and the phone number for my office. As well, for number 6, they want you to enter the name, address, and telephone number of the director of the specialized program that you participated in during 2022. Again, just enter my information. I know about the form 8843. Your faculty members, your supervisors, they don't know a thing about the form 8843. So if IRS wants to contact someone about the form, it's best for them to contact me. So feel free to put in my contact information there. In all these 12 years since I've been at UCSD, the IRS has never contacted me, just FYI. Okay, then for question 7, they ask you to enter the type of US visa you held. And again, when they say visa, they really mean your non-immigrant status that you were in while inside the United States. So you basically would just enter it for the year that you arrived. So if you weren't here earlier than 2021, but you came in 2021, as I did in my example, I just put J1 in the 2021. And then they're going to ask you for question 8, were you present in the United States as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of 2 of the 6 prior calendar years? So 2016 through 2021. And I see from this example that no, I was not, because I didn't arrive until 2021. Note that if you had arrived in 2020 and were here in 2021, then you would have to put yes, and you cannot exclude days of presence. So that would probably change your residency status to resident alien for tax purposes. But I suspect that all of you now, all the scholars on the call, are non-resident aliens, and you have at most 1 year of presence indicated in question 7. So you would indicate no for question 8. There is an exception. If you see the last phrase, if you check the yes box on line 8, you can't exclude days of presence. There is an exception. You can ask me later about that exception if any of you are concerned about that. Okay, let's move on to part 3 for students. This is very similar. Again, enter the address and feel free to use my phone number. And then feel free to use my contact name for question number 10. So the same kind of approach in those 2 questions, as well as the next question, where they want you to enter your immigration status for all these years. So I'm pretending that I arrived in 2018 and I was in F1 status for all subsequent years. So I put it down for those 4 years. Then I look at question number 12 and I see, was I present in the United States as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of more than 5 calendar years? Well, no, I've only got 4 right here. So that is fine. And then they say, if you check yes box on line 12, then you need to provide sufficient facts to establish that you do not intend to reside permanently in the United States. So if this applies to you, I would recommend that you seek the aid of a certified tax professional. And again, in question number 13, did you take affirmative steps to apply for green card status, permanent residency? If that's a yes, then chances are you're really not a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes, that you are intending to remain here, and you probably are a resident alien. But again, there could be extenuating circumstances, and so if this applies to you, you would want to seek the advice of a certified tax professional. Okay, and then we come to the signature block. So this is, again, if you're filing this by yourself, I mean alone, without the 1040 NR, if you have no U.S. source income, then you do need to sign and date this form. And then you're done. That's the form 8843, pretty straightforward. Do keep a copy of this form for your records to show that you've complied with U.S. tax law. The federal government, the IRS, probably gets hundreds of thousands of these each year. I don't know what they do with them. Who knows if they do anything with them? But you want to show that you have completed the form so that should there be any question down the road, for instance, if you're applying for permanent residency a few years in the future, you can show, yes, I've filed all my tax filing. I've met all my tax filing obligations. And then, of course, you have to physically mail the form to the address indicated in the instructions. So here is the address. And of course, you can always reference the instructions. But this is where you mail the form to. Okay, so here are the resources, the form and instructions. Do want to let you know that we have a couple of tax workshops coming up in March, both the federal tax workshop and the state tax workshop. So if you have questions, if some of you are needing to file the 1040 NR or the California tax return, those are good workshops for you. Now I will go into the chat and start answering your questions. Okay, so someone who's applied for an I-10 but did not receive it yet, shall I wait for my I-10 or shall I proceed filing without I-10 number on the form 8843? If you applied for an I-10, that suggests to me that you have some kind of U.S. source income that you will then need to file a 1040 NR referencing that income. So you should not file the 8843 because you need to file the 1040 NR, and the 8843 needs to be filed with that 1040 NR. So you need to file them simultaneously. The tax filing deadline is April 18th. So you do need to file by that date. If, however, you don't have your I-10 yet, you can request an extension so that hopefully you will get the I-10 and then be able to file later. However, when you file or request an extension, you still must pay your tax liability by April 18th, or you could be charged interest and penalty for not meeting your tax obligations by the tax deadline. So again, you can always apply for an extension, but you still need to pay your tax by the due date. And if you don't know what that tax is, then you need to estimate it and send them a payment. Okay, next question. what if I am a resident and pay taxes in a different country than my citizenship? That's okay. You would just answer the question straightforward. The question is, what is your country of citizenship? And you put it what the country of citizenship is. Doesn't matter where your previous tax residency is. Just answer that question, and that's fine. Let's see, someone who arrived in 2022, should I leave questions 7 and 8? No, go ahead and input the program information, even though the 2022 is not indicated on the section. You still need to indicate who the program director is. Next question. Last year, I didn't receive any salary, but I received health benefit. My health benefit was imputed as monthly income. Oh, this is a tax question. And I'm not going to answer this online here. If you have specific tax questions, please email internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu. So again, it's all one word, internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu. I'm sorry, this question is just a little more complicated, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, everyone else's time, trying to answer this very specific, complicated question. Okay, next question. I'm a J1 postdoc with income. I'm attempting to fill it for my J2 dependent who has a work permit but has not worked yet. Do we have to send our documents together? Yeah, so again, this form 8843 applies to J's and F's. That includes F2 dependents and J2 dependents. So you do need to write, to complete this form for every J2 or F2 family member. And yes, you can use my program information and name in completing it for any of your dependents. And they would go, you can send them all in the same envelope to the IRS. Or if you're having to file a 1040 NR and your dependents don't have any income, they're not filing a 1040 NR, but you can include their 8843s with your 1040 NR and form 8843. Next question. I cannot see any option for 2022. Okay, I cannot see any option for 2022 in question 7, part 2. That's fine. Just leave it blank, okay? Because you did indicate at the top of the form in the general section how many days you were present in 2022. This particular section is kind of looking at confirming that you are or are not a exempt individual for purposes of the substantial presence test. Can I sign the form for my J2? Basically, if the individual is 13 years or under, then a parent can sign for that individual. Otherwise, the individual should sign the form. The deadline for sending the form, April 18th. Next question. How the form 8843 should be completed by scholars receiving U.S. income. What is the difference between scholars, those scholars and scholars without U.S. income? So the difference between scholars with U.S. income and scholars without U.S. income is that scholars with U.S. income have to complete the form 1040 NR. Scholars that don't have U.S. source income only have to complete the form 8843. And as you can see, for most people, this form 8843 is a very simple form. The form 1040 NR is not so simple. We have Glacier Tax Prep, which is a software application for folks to use for completing their 1040 NR, and it will also generate a Form 8843 for you in the process of completing your 1040 NR. So if you do have U.S. source income, you can use GTP to complete your 1040 NR and have the 8843 completed at the same time. There is no online option for sending this form. You must physically mail it in. Okay, the next question is someone who was here in prior status for 4 years, and then they came back in 2022 on an H-1 visa. Should I still only look at the last 3 years for determining tax residency status? I would please submit your question to internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu, and I will respond to it there. Okay, next question. I'm a student on an F1 visa. Should I put 0 under this question? Enter the number of days in 2022 you claim you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. Okay, so let me go back to this form. So they're talking about question 4A here. Enter the actual number of days you were present in the United States during these years. And then 4B, enter the number of days you claim you can exclude. So if you are an exempt individual still for 2022, that means you can exclude all days of presence in 2022. So the number that you put in here of all the days that you were present in 2022, you can exclude because you're an exempt individual. So then you would put that same number for 4B. Okay, so you're excluding all days of presence in 2022 because you are an exempt individual and can exclude those days for purposes of the substantial presence test. Next question. I already answered. Deadline is April 18th. Let's see, next question. I came to the US in 2021, but did not fill this 8843 last year. Is it a problem? I don't know if it will be a problem. Probably not a big problem at all, but I would recommend that you just go onto the IRS website, the forms, and look for previous year forms and print out the form 8843 from 2021, fill it out in the same manner, and then include both of these forms together for your submission to IRS. And then, of course, make copies of that so you have information that you have met your tax filing obligations, even if it is late. Shouldn't be a problem. Next question. Yeah, so this is for a scholar who was here a long time ago under an F1 visa, more than 10 years ago. And so they're wondering about, does that time apply? And if you remember, for J1 scholars, they look back only the last 6 years. So once you get past that 6-year period, your prior history just drops off the IRS radar. They don't look at it. It's not considered. So yeah, you don't have to consider that if you are a scholar. Remember, students, however, it's a lifetime max. So if you were here in a prior situation, that is a lifetime. Will I do a workshop in the 1040 NR? I'm not going to do the workshop, but we have the federal tax workshop coming up, and that's hosted by faculty in the San Diego State University School of Accounting. So they are tax experts, and every year they are very obliging to provide this tax workshop for our internationals. But also know that if you do have US source income and you're an F1 or J1 at our institution, you are eligible to use Glacier Tax Prep to help you complete your tax, the 1040 NR tax return. But the federal tax workshop can be very helpful in understanding everything about the federal taxes and what your responsibilities are. And it's a great venue in which to ask your questions. Okay, question. I have U.S. source income and I want to ask where to find the 1040 NR form. You can just do an a search on the IRS website for 1040 NR. But if you're going to be using Glacier Tax Prep, Glacier, that software application will populate the form 10. It will create a 1040 form, 1040 NR form for you, and it will pull over your Glacier data and populate the 1040 NR form already with your Glacier data. So it's very efficient and much easier to use if you for completing your 1040 NR. Let's see, someone who started their J1 program in 2022. For part 2, do I still add the days I visited US for leisure and business trips? No, only add the days that you were present in the country in J or F status. See a question. I came in late, so not sure if you mentioned it before. I'm an F1 student and wonder if my income always comes with tax reduction. Do I need to send them the tax payment again? So basically, your employer will withhold from your paycheck the appropriate taxation amount based on the information you provide them in your Glacier record. So that's something that just happens automatically from your employer, and then you have to file a tax return each year to reconcile any difference from the amount that's already been taken out relative to the actual tax liability that you have. So if you had more taken out than your actual tax liability, then you get a refund. If you have less taken out than your actual tax liability, then you owe more money to the federal government. Let's see, F2 are kids. Should I not file for them? No, you do need to have them or fill out for them on their behalf, the 8843 for each of them. But again, it would not apply if you have US citizen children. They don't need to fill this out. It's just F2 or J2 children. Let's see, a question. Do you know if the ending date is the ending date of my program or the year 2022? Not quite sure what question that refers to. Let me check general information. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure which question, the ending date of your program. Not quite sure. If you can clarify for me, that would be great. Okay, next question. I heard you need to have a few forms ready before submitting your federal taxes. We also need the W-2 form, which you can find on UC Path website, and the 1042S or 1099. It depends. Everyone's tax situation is unique. So depending on the type of employment you have, the type of tax treaty benefits you may be eligible for, your tax residency status, you may have different kinds of forms. Those persons who have tax treaty benefits, your income will also be reported, or at least the income that the tax treaty benefit applies to, that will be reported on a 1042S, as will any fellowship payments for non-resident aliens for tax purposes. And any honorarium payments would also be reported on the 1042S. But if those situations don't apply to you, then you would not have a 1042S. The 1099 form is a form that applies to a variety of different kinds of income. There's a 1099 int for interest earned from banks. There's a 1099 div for dividends from stock trading platforms. There's a 1099 miss for independent contractor work. So there are all kinds of 1099 forms that are used to report types of income to you and the federal government. This would only apply to you if you had some kind of income that was categorized in those ways. So again, there's a variety of forms, but you're not necessarily going to get all these forms. It really depends on your individual circumstance. Next question. I never had a UC Pass access because the system never recognized my social security number. Can I use Glacier software anyway? You're eligible to use Glacier Tax Prep. I'm hoping that you provided Glacier with your social security number. I'm not quite sure if you haven't provided them with the social, I'm not quite sure how that works. But I would suggest reaching out to Glacier at ucsd.edu if you do have problems accessing GTP. You should be able to access GTP, Glacier Tax Prep, from your Glacier record with the university. Next question, can I use online programs like Tax Act to help file my tax? I'm not familiar with Tax Act. The thing you have to be really careful with online tax products like TurboTax they're set up for US citizens and resident aliens for federal tax purposes. They're not able to issue a 1040 NR or 8843. They can't apply, even if you're resident aliens and still are eligible for tax treaty benefits, they can't apply that tax treaty benefit. So you really should only use those tax products that you know are intended for non-resident aliens. Okay, question. I was on TN status and J status during 2022. The day count includes both statuses. Yeah, if you can email internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu with this question and a little more information on the dates when you changed, I'll be able to respond better. Okay, I think that is all of the questions. Again, appreciate your patience. And again, if you have specific questions, email internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu and do look at the resources. We'll be sending this presentation out to all of you who are listed on the roster here, and the recording will be uploaded to our website as well. And please do avail yourself of all the resources for your tax filing season. Thank you very much.